The woman's feet are bleeding through silk slippers never meant for stone. Gold chains hang from her wrists, not decorative, functional, so heavy that 2 Roman soldiers walk beside her, bearing the weight. She's been walking for 3 hours. She'll walk for 4 more. Round her, a language she understands perfectly, a language she refuses to speak. The robes catch Mediterranean sun like they're on fire, but her face shows nothing. Not defiance, not surrender. Something worse: calculation. Before we go any further, drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. It genuinely amazes me that a story this dark, from nearly 2,000 years ago, still matters to people across every continent. We're all trying to understand the same thing. Look at her again. Why is a woman being paraded to her execution dressed like she's attending her own coronation? Why are they wasting expensive jewels on someone who won't see tomorrow? This is 274 CE, Rome, the triumph of Emperor Aurelian. The woman is Zenobia, former queen of Palmyra, who 2 years ago controlled an empire stretching from Egypt to Anatolia. And what Rome is about to do to her is so much worse than killing her. Because execution would have been mercy. Here's what you think happened. Conquered queen, public humiliation, Roman superiority, the end. Here's what actually happened. A calculated psychological dismantling so precise, so methodical, that it changed how female power functioned in the ancient world for centuries. Not through her death, through her survival. Zenobia didn't lose because she was weak. She lost because Rome stopped fighting itself. While emperors murdered each other in rapid succession during the crisis of the 3rd century, she carved out an independent kingdom from Roman territory, defended it successfully, established trade with Persia, minted coins with her face beside the emperors, claiming equality. Her legions held Egypt. Her navy controlled eastern Mediterranean trade routes. She ruled not as regent for a son, but as Augusta in her own right. For 5 years, Rome couldn't touch her because Rome was too busy bleeding internally. Then Aurelian stabilized the empire. When he finally turned east in 272 CE, her army crumbled within months. Not because they weren't trained, because no regional force could match Roman discipline once Rome stopped pointing legions at itself. She fled toward Persia with what remained of her cavalry. They caught her at the Euphrates River crossing. She didn't resist. There was nowhere left to run. Standard protocol for captured enemy rulers was straightforward. Parade them through Rome in chains during a triumph. Then execute them in the Mamertine prison, the Stone Chamber, built into the Capitoline Hill, where Rome strangled or starved its most dangerous enemies. This had been tradition for 500 years. Vercingetorix, the Gallic chieftain who unified tribes against Caesar, was executed within hours of his triumph. Jugurtha, king of Numidia, starved to death over 6 days while celebrations continued above. Simon Bar Joara, leader of the Jewish revolt, was strangled in the Forum while Titus's procession moved toward the Temple of Jupiter. Zenobia should have died the same way. That's the story we tell. Except the actual historical record shows something different. Something historians mention briefly, then move past because they don't know what to do with it. Aurelian captured Zenobia in 272 CE. He didn't parade her through Rome until 274 CE, 2 years. What took 2 years? Why keep a captive queen alive for 24 months when standard practice was immediate display and execution? The Historia Augusta, the only source that provides detail, mentions she was so debilitated by captivity that guards supported her weight during the procession. Not from torture, the jewels were intact. The robes showed no damage. Her body bore no visible marks. So what weakened her? The answer is buried in a practice Roman sources don't describe because they didn't consider it noteworthy. Between capture and triumph, high-value captives underwent preparation, not in prisons, in controlled environments designed to preserve their appearance while systematically destroying their strength. Controlled starvation. Just enough food to survive, never enough to maintain muscle. Roman military physicians understood nutrition precisely. They calculated exact rations that kept legionaries combat-ready on campaign. They knew how much grain, how much protein, how much water sustained life while ensuring progressive physical deterioration. The portions were delivered on irregular schedules, sometimes twice daily, sometimes once every 2 days. The unpredictability prevented the body from adapting to routine, kept the metabolism unstable, maximized weakness. Sleep deprivation through constant disruption. Guards changed watch with maximum noise. Doors slammed at random intervals. Conversations were held deliberately near her cell at odd hours. Torches were replaced at midnight when darkness might have finally allowed rest. The space was never completely silent, never completely dark, never completely predictable. Days blurred into each other. Time became meaningless. Isolation alternating with forced interaction. Days of absolute silence where no one spoke to her, no one acknowledged her existence, fed through a slot in the door like an animal. Left alone with nothing but her thoughts and the growing weakness in her limbs. Then sudden interrogations, questions about Palmyra's treasury, about her generals, about her son's location. Questions she'd already answered. Questions that had no purpose except to force her to speak, to engage, to remember she was still human enough to be questioned. Then silence again. For weeks, not enough to damage visibly. Just enough that when the day came for her to walk through Rome, she couldn't stand without assistance. The symbolism was everything. She would walk in her own power, or rather, she would try to walk in her own power and fail, and Rome would be there to catch her. But there was something else in the preparation process that sources mention only in passing, almost casually. Captive royalty were required to watch executions. Cassius Dio mentions this detail when describing captives from Decebalus's Dacian wars. They were brought to Rome months before Trajan's triumph. During that time, they were regularly taken to the Colosseum, not to fight, to observe. They watched criminals thrown to animals. They watched gladiators kill each other. They watched prisoners of war from earlier campaigns executed in elaborate staged battles. Reenactments of Rome's victories performed by men about to die. They sat in special sections, guarded, visible to the crowd. The audience could see them watching, could see their reactions. Think about what that means. When Zenobia finally walked through Rome in golden chains, too weak to stand alone. She'd already spent months watching what happened to captives Rome didn't consider valuable enough to preserve. She'd seen men torn apart by dogs. She'd seen gladiators bleed out in sand while crowds cheered. She'd seen prisoners of war, men who'd once been soldiers, who'd fought for their kingdoms, reduced to entertainment. She'd seen what execution looked like in every possible variation. She knew exactly what she'd been spared, and everyone watching her knew she knew. 3 days before the triumph, captive royalty were bathed, dressed in their own royal regalia, given their jewelry back. Ancient sources mention that Zenobia's robes were repaired where campaign dirt had damaged them. Her jewels were cleaned by professional jewelers brought in specifically to restore their shine. Her hair was arranged in the Palmyrene royal style. Every detail was calibrated. Every element of her appearance had to be perfect. Not mercy, contrast. The message wasn't look at our captive. It was look at what power looks like when it can't protect you. Imagine what the crowd saw that day. A woman dressed in silks that cost more than most Romans earned in a lifetime. Wearing jewelry representing the wealth of an entire kingdom. Every visible element screaming royalty, status, divine authority. Except she couldn't walk on her own. A queen who once commanded armies, who signed treaties with Persia as an equal, who administered justice over millions, who'd executed enemies and pardoned allies, who'd minted coins claiming she stood beside emperors, now shuffling forward while Roman guards held her upright because she was too weak to stand alone. Her robes were royal, her jewels were real, her hair was perfect, but she needed help to walk. That contrast was everything. That was the entire purpose of the 2 years of preparation. To create a woman who looked like power incarnate but moved like a broken thing. Roman triumphs were psychological warfare, but not against the defeated queen. They were messages to her people, 2 allied kingdoms watching from the crowd, 2 future rebels considering resistance. The subtext was always, if divine right could have saved her, it would have. If military strength could have saved her, it would have. If political brilliance could have saved her, it would have. None of it did. But here's the part that changes everything. Most captive kings died immediately after their triumphs. Zenobia lived. Ancient sources claim she was given a villa outside Rome, that her daughters married Roman senators, that she spent the rest of her life, possibly 30 more years, as a Roman dependent. Why? The answer isn't in what Rome did to its enemies. It's in what Rome needed from its allies. By the 3rd century, Rome controlled territory from Britain to Mesopotamia. They couldn't garrison every province, couldn't station legions in every city that might rebel. The math didn't work. Rome had roughly 30 legions, about 150,000 legionaries total. That's 1 soldier for every 300 people in the empire. Not enough to occupy, only enough to punish. So Rome ruled through client kings, local rulers who maintained their thrones by accepting Roman oversight. This system required credibility above all else. Client kings had to believe cooperation would be rewarded, but they also had to believe that challenging Rome meant total destruction, not just military defeat. Something worse. When Rome captured a queen, they faced a calculation. Execute her fast and clean, she becomes a martyr. Her people remember her as a hero who died resisting. Resistance becomes noble. Sacrifice becomes honorable. Another generation grows up hearing stories about the queen who chose death over submission. Stories are dangerous. Stories inspire, but let her live. Keep her visible. Let her age. Let her become ordinary. Let her people see their once mighty queen living as a Roman dependent. Her daughters married to Roman men. Her grandchildren speaking Latin. Her bloodline absorbed into the empire that destroyed her. Let them watch power dissolve into irrelevance over decades. Execution creates legends. Survival creates questions. Zenobia spent her final years in that villa outside Rome. Ancient sources don't record what she did there. Whether she wrote, whether she received visitors, whether she maintained correspondence with Palmyra. We don't know if her daughters visited. We don't know if she asked them to. Think about what survival meant. Every day, waking up in a Roman villa, eating Roman food. Speaking Latin because no one around you speaks Palmyrene anymore. Watching your daughters marry men whose fathers conquered your empire. Watching your grandchildren grow up Roman, not tortured, not imprisoned, not executed. Just irrelevant. Execution ends the story. The queen becomes legend. Her people can say she died rather than submit. She chose honor over survival. She resisted to the end. But survival makes people ask, was resistance worth it? And if the answer even might be no, why would anyone resist again? Now go back to another queen, Boudica, Britannia, 60 CE, when her husband died. Roman officials seized everything, ignored his will, declared the kingdom forfeit. Queen Boudica protested. They flogged her publicly in front of her people. Her daughters, teenagers, unmarried, were violated by Roman soldiers. Also publicly. Also in front of their people. Tacitus records this with unusual directness for such matters. He emphasizes that even Romans found it disturbing. But here's the thing. Roman law allowed it. Captured women were considered spoils of war. This wasn't controversial. So why did Tacitus feel compelled to note that even Romans were shocked? Because Rome wasn't doing this to break Boudica. They were doing it to provoke her. They wanted the rebellion. Because they'd learned that gradual subjugation created ongoing resistance, but immediate total rebellion, crushed, completely kept conquered territory quiet for generations. Boudicca's rebellion ended with 80,000 Britons dead in a single afternoon. Tacitus claims she poisoned herself rather than face capture. A living Boudicca would have been dangerous. A dead Boudicca, crushed after a failed revolt that cost 80,000 lives, became a warning. 3 generations later, Roman historian Cassius Dio writes about British queens with a tone bordering on anxiety. He describes Queen Cardamandua with language emphasizing her political marriages, her diplomatic skills, her ability to negotiate. He never mentions military capability. He never suggests she ruled through strength. Why? Because Rome had successfully redefined what queenship could mean in Britain. Not warriors, diplomats, mediators, marriage brokers, never threats. After Zenobia, no Eastern queen challenged Rome for 2 centuries. When Palmyra rebuilt, it never crowned another woman. The city-state that had been ruled by queens since the 1st century suddenly stopped. Not because of law, because of memory. After Boudica, Celtic tribes in Britain stopped putting women in military command. The archaeological record shows it clearly. Warrior burials that had included women for centuries suddenly stopped including them. After 60 CE, this wasn't coincidence. This was learned behavior. Rome fell in 476 CE. The empire that perfected breaking queens without killing them collapsed from within. Weakened by succession crises, civil wars, unstable leadership. And one of the recurring problems, Rome never successfully established female succession. Imperial wives and mothers wielded enormous shadow power, but that very ambiguity created instability. Agrippina, Livia, Julia dominate powerful women operating through sons and husbands because they could never rule directly. The same system that broke foreign queens prevented Rome from stabilizing its own royal women. The irony is almost beautiful. Almost. Zenobia's villa still exists. It's a ruin outside Rome now, barely marked, rarely visited, no tours, no plaques. The Mamertine prison where male captive kings were executed is a tourist attraction. Preserved, documented. You can stand in the cell where Vercingetorix died. You can see where Jugurtha starved. Guided tours run every hour. But there's no monument to what happened to queens. No marker for Boudica's daughters, whose names we don't even know. No memorial for the women who survived triumphs and spent decades living in Roman villas, watching their empires forget them. History remembers the executions. It forgets the survival. Because survival wasn't mercy. It was the punishment that lasted longer. A 6th century Syrian chronicler preserves what might be a quote from Zenobia. Might be invention. Impossible to verify. But it sounds right. In my time, I was one of the most powerful women in the East. Now I am an ornament in a Roman garden, useful only as proof that resistance ends in decoration. Zenobia died sometime around 274 CE. We don't know where. We don't know if anyone mourned. The woman who once ruled an empire, who commanded legions, who negotiated with Persia as an equal, simply faded from the record. Not executed, not martyred, just forgotten, which was always the point. Rome understood something we pretend to have forgotten. The cruelest thing you can do to a queen isn't kill her. It's let her live long enough to watch everything she built mean nothing.